It's not often I have to restart a review already in progress, but I suppose that's the nature of digital distribution. See, I was looking at a game called Eselmir and the 5 Magical Gifts, which aside from having an aversion to capitalisation was borked, basically. One of my machines gave me random graphical glitches, and both machines I tried it on had the mouse jumping to random locations. It was baffling to see because the game uses the Visioneer engine, which is pretty well established at this point. I've played a few games which use one version of this engine or another. Daedalic Entertainment games in particular seem quite fond of it, and I have never seen such a game exhibiting these types of glitches. Now, what prompted me to start over and front-load this whole explanation was the developers releasing a patch which upgrades the version of the engine they were using and fixes these issues. So if you've tried this game and put it aside for any of the reasons I just mentioned, you might have reason to pick it back up again. Maybe. Shall we find out if it's worth it? Let's do that. We open with a man talking about the legends men tell of great heroes and shiny beards and such. Then he mentions the tales that aren't told, the lost stories that no one hears. Is he about to tell us such a tale? How can he do this if it's a story no one knows? I hope you weren't looking for an answer because we cut to a guy knocking on a door. He's let inside and meets a young man in a wheelchair and an old man without one, which is a nice change from how that scenario usually plays out. The young man is transcribing the old man's stories, one of which the mysterious stranger seems to know himself. A story about a priest who is charged by a goddess to find the fabled and titular 5 magical gifts of Eselmir. And so on that epic quest he goes. I'll admit this up front, I couldn't get into the story. I have a hard enough time getting into fantasy worlds compared to sci-fi ones, and it's not helped when there's a ton of names, terms and concepts to get your head around. If there's a fantasy world equivalent of technobabble, that's what this game threw at me. Which gets contrasted somewhat when one of your inventory items is literally named Stuff for the Journey. I mean, preferring sci-fi is my thing, can't blame the game for that, but it doesn't make it any easier to get into when it's doing this. To translate the basics, you play as some kind of warrior bishop, evidenced by your first tasks including answering the call of a god, reading literature and practicing combat. A priest who does flippy shit, basically. Which comes in handy for a handful of quote-unquote combat sections where you have to time a mouse click and watch some 3 frames per second animation play out. Thankfully, those are few and far between. On the other hand, your main character's walk cycle has about 5 frames, which is reused for both walking and running speeds and isn't properly matched up to either. I only mention that one in particular because it's something you'll be looking at for the entire game. So yeah, it could grate on you. In fact, I'm going to get all my foibles out of the way at once. Don't worry, there's positives coming later. The game feels like an amateur effort. The bare bones animation, complete with fade to black transitions instead of showing us something like a guy sitting down, sparse voice acting and various glitches are but some of the problems that spring to mind. In fact, I ran to a point where I couldn't progress without the game crashing and ended up having to use the debug menu to skip it. Granted, the game might have got messed up from the previous time I had to use the debug menu, which I only had to do because the game crashed. You see the problem here, it's debug menus all the way down. Save early, save often applies here. If only they'd given us more than 6 save slots. I mean, why? Moreover, my QA senses were getting triggered again and again. Long corridors with repeating or extremely similar backgrounds, or even better, long sequences where you follow another character down a long corridor with repeating extremely similar backgrounds. Things that, in my opinion, would have been the first pieces of feedback from someone who'd played the entire game. That said, I've got to thank the devs for that puzzle where you solve one part of it and then the game does the other parts for you rather than making you traverse 11 floors. Seriously, thanks for that, I appreciate it. Maybe offset by that one puzzle where you have a perfectly good solution but the character explicitly states they want to do something else, but hey. Now the interface is an old school Sierra style one where left click moves you around and right click changes the current verb, except here it's context sensitive to the object you're highlighting and you've got a maximum of 3 different choices. Which takes care of my usual gripe, that being the need to cycle through all the verbs to find the one you want because you can't remember the order the verbs are in. This potentially leads to another problem, however. If you need to use an item on something, it just appears in the right-click verb list thing for whatever it can be used on. Now, whilst I could compare this to some other game which gave certain characters a giant-ass give option to completely lampshade the fact you were going to give them an item at some point, it's not a fair comparison to make. The icon only appears in the list if you actually have the item required, and if you reduce to trying everything on everything else, this would actually speed it up a bit. So 2 things I thought I was hardwired to hate actually turned out to be okay, if not an overall positive. What I'm not so sure about are the extra interface items like the character sheet, which shows you some quest related items and the gods you've gotten in good with. It makes sense in the game. Or the mission list, a feature I usually heap quite a bit of praise upon and yet find fault with here. Having a list of your objectives is a good thing. It's useful for a quick reminder or if you've put the game down for a while. What's not useful is when I have a long list of preparations to make for a journey, such as finding a map, procuring a horse, gain permission to leave the city, research a legend, etc. And the mission list basically says, do the thing. At that point, it might as well not even be there. There are separate sections for character-specific missions and overall game missions though, so I guess there's one reason. Now you might have noticed I haven't said anything along the lines of, don't play this, or I want to fall in a well and die in a fire. So assuming you're fine with the interface, the presentation, and you're quite comfortable with the save early, save often mantra, what can this game offer you? Well, my sarcasm-laden voice aside, I think the game really does offer you an epic quest, and not just because it clocked in at around 12 hours for me. There's a wide variety of locations to visit, people to meet, and stories to hear. This game loves to tell you stories, and stories within those stories are not uncommon. You'll need to be comfortable with lots of reading, obviously, but there's plenty of it in here. And it's got an epically silly theme song to match. There's an earnestness to this thing that I just can't help but love. It's not all reading, silly walks and QuickTime events either. You get some fun self-contained puzzles too, along with some riddles and interesting math problems that I definitely didn't have to look up a walkthrough to solve, stop asking. I can hardly accuse the developers of not caring. They've even got a few of those sweet little touches I love so much, like the priest who chastises you for running inside a holy temple, even if you're power walking at best, or the main menu screen changing to match whichever location you're in. And there's a possibility that any of the problems I've mentioned before could be patched out. The most recent update was less than a fortnight before this video is meant to go up. The animation one does seem pretty unlikely though, especially when you've got a crash bug in the mix, priorities and all that. It does beg the question of how the game released in the terrible state it did, but devil's advocate here, maybe it never happened on their machines and they don't have an 80-person QA department to check for these problems. Just a hunch. Bottom line is, the game's a bit of a mess and it probably wasn't to my taste to begin with. All I can hope is that I've given it a fair shake here and helped you decide whether you're interested or not. Although if the game ever does crap out on you, go to the main menu, hit D and G, and the debug menu will let you skip to any point you want, so bear that in mind.